The final part. I stared at the first sentence for what felt like an eternity. If you're reading this, then I finally kept the promise I made to your mother. My hands were shaking. I read the sentence again. Then again. My mother. Eleanor knew my mother. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. The letter continued. Ben, by the time you read this, you will probably be wondering why I left you this house. You will probably think there has been a mistake. There hasn't. I didn't leave you this house because you were my relative. I left it to you because your mother asked me to. I stopped reading. My mother had been dead for almost 15 years. She had never mentioned Eleanor. Not once. I continued. Your mother knew she didn't have much time left. She came to me one afternoon and asked me to make a promise. She knew you would eventually forget parts of your childhood. She knew you would remember the difficult years, but perhaps forget the people who helped you through them. She asked me to protect one place for you. This house. And she asked me not to tell you why until you were old enough to understand. I looked around the room. The old piano. The photographs. The rocking chair. The bluebird keychain. Everything suddenly felt connected. I turned the page. Your mother spent the happiest years of her life in this house. Before your father died, the three of us used to come here every summer. You were too young to remember. After your father's death, your mother couldn't afford to keep the house. So I bought it. But I never considered it mine. I kept it for you. I couldn't breathe. The memories began returning. A summer afternoon. My mother laughing. Someone pushing me on a swing. A woman standing near the kitchen window. The smell of chocolate cake. The sound of my father playing the piano. I had spent years believing those memories belonged to different places. They didn't. They all belonged here. Then I found another photograph inside the envelope. It showed my parents sitting on the porch. My father was holding me. My mother was standing beside him. And behind them was Eleanor. On the back of the photograph, my mother had written, "Our family, even when life changes." I wiped my eyes. Then I noticed something written underneath. A second sentence. Ben must know one day. That was when I understood. Eleanor hadn't simply been protecting a house. She had been protecting my memories. I kept reading. There is something else you need to know. The anonymous payments you found in the drawer were not all from me. Some were from your mother. She wanted to make sure you never felt like you were growing up without enough. But she didn't want you to know how much she struggled. She wanted you to remember her as your mother, not as a woman who was afraid of losing everything. I sat down. For years, I had remembered my childhood as difficult. Money had always been tight. There had been nights when my mother told me everything was fine, even when it clearly wasn't. I thought she had simply been strong. Now I realized something. She hadn't been strong because she wasn't afraid. She had been strong because she was afraid, and still kept going. The final page was shorter. Ben, if you are reading this, I am probably gone. I wish I could have been there when you opened this letter. I wish I could have seen your face. But I know your mother is smiling somewhere. She wanted you to have a place where you could finally understand how loved you were. Not by one person, by many. Your mother, your father, and me. The house is yours now. But don't keep it empty. Fill it with the kind of memories you once made here. Invite people in. Let children laugh in the garden. Play the piano badly. Bake too much cake. And when someone needs a place to stay, leave the light on. That is what your mother wanted. She believed a home isn't defined by who owns it. A home is defined by who feels safe inside it. Love, Eleanor. I couldn't read the last line through my tears. I closed the letter. For several minutes. I just sat there. Alone. In the house I had never known I had. The next morning, I called the lawyer. I don't want to sell the house. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. You knew? Eleanor told me exactly what she wanted. What did she say? He opened another file. She said that if you chose to sell the house, I should let you. But if you chose to keep it. He paused. She wanted you to know there was something else. My heart started beating faster. What? He handed me another envelope. This one was much smaller. On the front was a single word. Basement. I stared at him. There is a basement? He smiled. Apparently. I returned to the house that afternoon. Behind a bookshelf in the hallway, I found a hidden latch. The shelf moved. Behind it was a narrow staircase. I turned on the light. At the bottom was a small room. Nothing expensive. No treasure. No money. Just shelves filled with boxes. Every box had a year written on it. 2002. All the way to the year my mother died. I opened the first one. Inside were birthday cards. Christmas presents. Photographs. School certificates. Letters. Every important moment of my childhood. Eleanor had kept. Then I found something that made me stop. A small cassette tape. On the label, my mother's handwriting. For Ben, when he's ready. I found an old cassette player upstairs. It still worked. I pressed play. There was static. Then, my mother's voice. I hadn't heard it in years. "Hi, Ben." I covered my mouth. My mother's voice continued. "If you're listening to this, then Eleanor finally gave you the house." She laughed softly. "I know you probably have 1,000 questions. I wish I could answer them. But there's one thing I need you to know. I was never alone. Even when I thought I was. Eleanor was there. Your father was there. And you were the reason I kept getting up every morning." I closed my eyes. Her voice continued. "One day, you may think your childhood was filled with things we couldn't afford. But that's not how I remember it. I remember you laughing in the garden. I remember your father teaching you to ride a bicycle. I remember you falling asleep on my shoulder. I remember chocolate cake. I remember summer. And I remember love." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "So please, don't spend your life trying to understand what we didn't have. Spend it appreciating what we did." The recording ended. I sat there crying. But this time, the tears weren't only from sadness. They were from relief. For the first time, I understood my childhood. A year later, the house looked completely different. The walls were repainted. The garden was full of flowers. The old tree house was repaired. And the kitchen smelled like chocolate cake. But I didn't turn it into my private home. I did exactly what Eleanor asked. I left the light on. The house became a small community center. Every Saturday, children came to read books. Older people came for coffee. Families who needed temporary help could stay in one of the spare rooms. And on the wall beside the front door, I placed a photograph of 3 people. My mother, my father, and Eleanor. Underneath it, I wrote, "Some people leave you money. Some leave you memories. The best leave you a reason to help someone else." One evening, years later, a little girl walked into the kitchen. She couldn't have been more than 8. She looked at the photograph. "Who's that lady?" I smiled. Her name was Eleanor. "Was she your grandmother?" I thought about the question. Then I smiled. "No, but she loved me like family." The girl looked at the photograph again. "Why did she give you this house?" I looked toward the window. The porch light was glowing, just like Eleanor had asked. "Because she wanted to make sure I always had somewhere to come home to." The little girl smiled. Then she ran outside to join the other children. I stood there alone for a moment, looking at the old house. And suddenly I realized something. I had spent years believing that Eleanor had left me a house. She hadn't. She had left me something much bigger. She had left me proof that love can survive decades, that promises can outlive the people who make them, and that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't something you receive. It's something you continue. I turned off the kitchen light, but I left the porch light on, because somewhere, in the memories of this house, my mother was still laughing. My father was still playing the piano. Eleanor was still watching from the porch. And for the first time, I finally understood what she meant. A home isn't the place you inherit. A home is the place where you make sure someone else never feels alone. The end.